The strangest thing about Roger Daltrey's goodbye is that he does not sound like a man who is finished. Listen carefully, and the voice is still there. That hard, defiant sound that once rose above Pete Townshend's crashing guitar. The voice behind My Generation, behind Blue Eyes, and the scream that still closes, Won't Get Fooled Again. At 82, Roger recently made an extraordinary claim. He said his voice might be better than it had ever been. He could still sing the old songs in their original keys. He could still reach notes that surprised even him. And yet, only a short time later, another phrase appeared beside his name. The final solo tour. Not officially the final performance, not a complete retirement. The wording left enough space for hope. But it also introduced a question Roger's audience could no longer dismiss. If his voice is still strong, why does this feel like goodbye? In August 2026, he is scheduled to return to the United States for a run of more intimate concerts called A Great Night Out. The tour begins in Mesa, Arizona, and continues through Las Vegas, Nashville, New York, and several other cities before ending in Massachusetts in late September. The official announcement describes it as his return after The Who's farewell journey across North America. It also uses language suggesting that this could be his final proper solo tour of the country. That distinction matters. Roger is not walking away because he has stopped loving the stage. Something else is changing. You can hear it in the way he talks about time now. You can see it in the smaller venues, the carefully selected dates, and the refusal to promise too much. A year earlier, his words had been less reassuring. Before The Who began its farewell tour, Roger admitted that he was nervous about reaching the final show. Touring had become grueling. His hearing had deteriorated. Macular degeneration was affecting his sight. A severe case of viral meningitis from years earlier had left his body struggling to regulate temperature properly. "I just hope I make it through," he said. It was an unsettling confession from a performer whose entire image had been built around physical force. This was the man who swung a microphone like a weapon, the man who stood almost motionless before releasing one of rock music's most famous screams. Roger rarely appeared fragile, even when the people standing beside him began disappearing. Keith Moon was gone, John Entwistle was gone. And somehow Roger and Pete kept returning, carrying a band that was slowly becoming a memory of itself. The final North American tour of The Who was announced under a title that seemed almost too perfect. The Song Is Over. It began in Florida in August 2025 and brought the surviving founders back through the cities that had turned 4 young men from London into enormous American stars. Roger called the farewell bittersweet. America had changed their lives in 1967. Now they had returned to close a door that had remained open for nearly 6 decades. But when that tour ended, Roger did something unexpected. He booked another one, not with The Who, not inside enormous arenas. This time he would travel under his own name, surrounded by musicians playing familiar songs in a looser, more personal setting. To some fans, that sounded encouraging. To others, it felt like a man arranging one last conversation after the official goodbye had already been spoken. And the truth about why Roger Daltrey keeps returning may have less to do with his voice than with what happens when the stage finally becomes silent. Roger Daltrey once admitted that he needs to sing to keep his voice working. That sounds almost ordinary until you consider what it means at 82. The very act that exhausts him may also be the thing preventing his voice from disappearing. Rest offers protection, but too much silence carries its own risk. So he returns to the stage, knowing that every performance asks something from a body that no longer recovers as quickly as it once did. This is where the goodbye becomes difficult to understand. Perhaps Roger is not continuing despite the danger. Perhaps he believes continuing is the only way to delay it. During a solo tour in 2024, he explained that singing regularly kept his vocal instrument in shape. The smaller shows felt different from The Who's enormous productions. There was less pressure, more room for stories, and fewer expectations about what the evening needed to become. He could change a song, answer questions from the audience, or perform something The Who had rarely touched. But there is another reason those quieter stages matter. For most of his life, Roger's identity existed inside a relationship that was never peaceful. Pete Townshend wrote the words. Roger had to inhabit them. Pete could be cerebral, uncertain and restless. Roger was physical, direct, sometimes frighteningly so. Their arguments were not clever disagreements between polite colleagues. They shouted. They threatened to leave. On more than one occasion, violence entered the room. During the early years, Roger saw himself as the person keeping the Who under control. The others did not always agree. Keith Moon's destructive energy could turn an ordinary night into chaos. Pete's temper could ignite without warning. John Entwistle appeared calm, but even he was part of a group that often seemed one argument away from collapse. Roger was briefly pushed out of the band after a confrontation involving Moon's drugs and a physical fight. The separation did not last. He returned after promising to control his temper, although nobody involved suddenly became easy to work with. Years later, Roger and Pete would still describe each other less like comfortable friends and more like brothers who had survived something together. Pete once called their connection a bonded love, built partly on understanding each other's limitations. Roger simply said, "We're like brothers, I suppose." That hesitation matters. I suppose. Even after decades, he could not make the relationship sound simple. The Who's power came partly from that instability. Roger did not write Behind Blue Eyes, but when he sang it, the loneliness felt personal. He did not create the anger inside My Generation, but his voice gave it a face. Pete supplied emotions he often struggled to express directly. Roger carried them into crowded rooms, and then the room began emptying. Keith Moon died in 1978. John Entwistle died in 2002, just before an American tour. Each loss should have ended the band. Somehow, it did not. Roger and Pete continued, carrying the names of two dead friends into every performance. That burden was rarely discussed on stage. The missing men were simply missing. Yet Roger still turned toward the space where they once stood. Now, when he appears with his solo musicians, the arrangement feels more relaxed, but it also exposes something the Who's noise could once conceal. Without Pete beside him, without Keith's drums or John's bass, Roger is no longer only the singer of a legendary band. He is the last man standing at the microphone, trying to discover whether the voice belongs to him, or to all the people who are no longer there to hear it. Years before Roger Daltrey began speaking openly about farewell tours, his voice had already given him a warning. It happened quietly. During a solo tour in 2009, the high notes became harder to reach. Singing began to feel like work in a way Roger did not recognize. He had spent decades treating his voice as something dependable, almost mechanical. He warmed it up, stepped forward, and expected it to answer. This time, it resisted. At first, there was no dramatic announcement, no public panic. Roger finished the dates and sought medical advice. Then a specialist found abnormal cells on one of his vocal cords. The diagnosis was dysplasia, a precancerous condition that required surgery. The timing was brutal. The Who were preparing to perform at the Super Bowl halftime show, one of the largest television events in America. Millions would be listening. Roger, however, did not yet know whether the voice they expected to hear would survive the procedure. He underwent laser surgery in December 2009. The problematic cells were removed, but the operation left him with a different kind of fear. Cancer had not been confirmed. The immediate danger appeared controlled. Still, the place doctors had touched was the place where his entire public life existed. For weeks, he had to wait. No famous scream could help him. No amount of determination could force damaged tissue to heal faster. Roger was suddenly dependent on silence, the one condition a singer normally spends his life trying to break. Then, roughly 2 months later, he stood with The Who at the Super Bowl. To the audience, it looked like another triumphant performance. Most people watching had no idea how recently his future had been uncertain. Roger sang beneath enormous stadium lights, while the words, "Who are you?" and Baba O'Reilly traveled into homes across the country. He had returned. But the story did not end there. Dysplasia can return, so Roger continued undergoing examinations after tours. He became more cautious about certain notes. He learned that protecting the voice did not mean treating it gently every moment. It meant understanding when to use it, when to stop, and when pride had to surrender to medical advice. That experience explains something about the man touring today. When Roger says he must keep singing or risk losing the strength in his voice, he is not offering a motivational slogan. He has already lived through the alternative. He knows how quickly a familiar sound can become uncertain, and yet the voice is no longer the only part of him under pressure. At a Royal Albert Hall concert in 2025, Roger joked that age had left him going deaf and blind, before adding that he still had his voice. The audience laughed because he did, but beneath the humor was an uncomfortable inventory: diminished hearing, macular degeneration affecting his sight, and a body still carrying damage from viral meningitis. The joke worked because Roger refused to sound frightened. That does not mean he wasn't. Before The Who's farewell tour, he admitted that he was nervous about reaching the end. Heat could cause his body to sweat excessively, draining salts and creating the possibility of serious illness. He understood the risk and went on stage anyway. There is stubbornness in that decision, perhaps even recklessness. But there is also memory. Roger knows what silence felt like in 2009. He knows what it meant to wait for his own voice to return. So when he walks toward another microphone now, the question may not be why he refuses to stop. The harder question is what he believes will happen when he finally does. There was another goodbye Roger Daltrey had already begun before most fans noticed it. It did not involve The Who. There was no farewell tour attached to it, no arena lights, no final encore. It happened at the Royal Albert Hall. For more than 2 decades, Roger had stood behind the annual concerts for Teenage Cancer Trust, helping turn a week of music into one of Britain's most recognizable charity events. The first shows began in 2000. Over the years, artists such as Paul McCartney, Oasis, The Cure, Ed Sheeran and Florence and the Machine appeared beneath that famous domed ceiling. Roger was not simply a guest performer. He helped shape the entire thing. He called artists. He persuaded friends. He protected the event when schedules became difficult. And year after year he returned to remind audiences why the concerts existed. Young people facing cancer needed hospital spaces designed for them, not wards where they felt like children or elderly patients. It became a different kind of legacy, less visible than Woodstock, more personal than another platinum record. Then Roger began stepping back. The announcement was handled carefully. The concerts would continue. New guest curators would help guide future programs. Nothing was described as an ending. Still, something had changed. When a person creates an institution and then begins passing it to others, the moment carries a meaning nobody needs to say aloud. Roger knew he could not hold every responsibility forever. At the 2025 Royal Albert Hall concerts, The Who returned for 2 performances supporting the charity. By then, Roger had already spent more than 20 years helping the event raise money and awareness for specialist cancer care. The organization publicly acknowledged that he was moving away from leading the annual series, even though his connection to the cause remained. That week, he also made the audience laugh. He spoke about losing his hearing. He mentioned the deterioration of his sight. Then he joked that he still had his voice, otherwise he would have the complete condition of Tommy, the deaf, mute, and blind character from The Who's rock opera. People laughed because Roger delivered it like Roger always does, without asking for sympathy. But humor can hide more than fear. Sometimes it hides recognition. He was standing inside a room where he had spent years helping frightened young people imagine a future beyond illness. Now he was acknowledging changes in his own body while preparing to surrender part of the work that had defined his later life. The contrast was hard to miss. He had taught audiences that survival was not only about remaining alive, it was about preserving dignity, independence, and a sense that tomorrow still belonged to you. Now those same questions were following him. What can he still control? What must he hand over? And what does he refuse to surrender? Perhaps this explains why the 2026 solo concerts are being presented as intimate evenings rather than another giant production. The official description promises Who classics, solo material, unexpected songs, and candid stories. Not a monument, not a carefully polished farewell ceremony, something closer to a conversation. That choice feels deliberate. In an arena, Roger Daltrey becomes the voice of The Who. In a smaller theatre, there is nowhere for the man himself to disappear. The old stories come forward. The names of Keith and John return. The distance between performer and audience becomes smaller. And maybe that is what Roger wants now. Not another victory lap. A chance to leave certain things in the room before he no longer has the strength to carry them. But one story remains more difficult than the others. Because the first time Roger truly understood that The Who could end, it was not age that forced him to face it. It was a telephone call that arrived only hours before a tour was supposed to begin. The telephone call came in Las Vegas, June 27, 2002. The Who were supposed to begin an American tour the following night. Equipment had arrived. Tickets had been sold. Musicians were already preparing for the first show. Then John Entwistle was found dead in his hotel room. Roger had lost Keith Moon 24 years earlier. That loss had been chaotic and terrible, but perhaps not entirely unimaginable. Keith had lived recklessly for so long that everyone around him had learned to fear the phone ringing at the wrong hour. John felt different. He had been the still figure on stage, the man who seemed almost untouched by the disorder around him. Roger and Pete exploded outward. John stood near his amplifiers, fingers moving across the bass with a precision that made the noise around him possible. And suddenly he was gone. The official account was stark. Entwistle died from a heart attack linked to cocaine use inside the Hard Rock Hotel in Las Vegas. Only hours before The Who were meant to return to the road. The immediate question was not about music. It was whether the tour should continue at all. Cancelling would have seemed respectful. Continuing could look cold. There was no decision that could make the situation feel right, and perhaps that was why Roger and Pete chose the option that seemed hardest to explain. The Who went on stage. Some fans never forgave them for that. Others understood immediately. Roger later suggested that John would not have wanted the entire machine to stop because of him. But explanations made after a death are rarely complete. They are attempts to make a decision survivable. Imagine standing where your friend should be. The lights come up, the crowd roars because it does not know what else to do. The first song begins, and every note reveals an absence that rehearsals cannot repair. Roger had to sing through it, not once, night after night. That tour changed something inside The Who. They were no longer a wounded version of the original band. Half of the founding lineup was now missing. Roger and Pete were carrying the name alone, supported by excellent musicians who could play the parts but could never reproduce the history behind them. Years later, Pete described John's death as the moment when everything on stage became different. The space was not only musical, it was emotional. Roger rarely turned that pain into a public performance. He did not stop concerts to explain exactly what John meant to him. He did not build his identity around grief. Instead, he kept singing songs that still contained John's bass and Keith's drums in the memories of everyone listening. That may be why farewells trouble him. Stopping does not only mean losing the stage, it means losing the place where the missing members still briefly return. When Baba O'Reilly begins, Keith is somewhere inside the expectation of the drums. When My Generation turns toward its bass break, John is still waiting in the audience's memory. Roger does not need to name them. The songs do it for him. And now, after The Who's farewell tour, he is preparing to cross America without Pete beside him. The venues are smaller. The name on the ticket is his alone. Perhaps that is freedom. Or perhaps Roger is slowly removing the layers around himself one by one until there is no band left to stand behind. Only the singer, only the voice, and one final question he has avoided for most of his life. When the applause stops, who is Roger Daltrey without The Who? Roger Daltrey has not announced the end of his life in music. That is important. He has not said that he will never sing again. He has not promised that every remaining concert is the last. In fact, his 2026 American solo tour begins on August 23rd in Mesa, Arizona, and continues through September, with dates in Las Vegas, Nashville, New York, and Massachusetts. The official announcement presents it as a new run of intimate shows after The Who's farewell tour. But another description appeared later, possibly his last proper solo tour of the United States. Possibly is a small word. It protects everyone. It allows promoters to create urgency without declaring an ending. It allows fans to hope. It allows Roger to avoid making a promise that his body, or his desire to perform, might later force him to break. Still, the word is there. Last. Roger's goodbye is not a single event. It is happening in pieces. He has stepped back from leading the Teenage Cancer Trust concert series. The Who completed what was announced as its final North American tour in 2025. His doctors now require rest days between major performances to protect his voice. His hearing and sight have declined. Touring asks more from him than it once did. Yet he continues. That contradiction may be the most honest part of the story. People often imagine retirement as a clean decision. One morning, a person accepts that the work is finished and peacefully begins another life. But when the work has shaped every part of your identity for 60 years, stopping is not simply a change in schedule. It can feel like disappearing. Roger was not only hired to sing songs, he became the body those songs used to reach the world. Pete Townshend could write about anger, isolation, fear, and youth slipping away. But Roger had to stand in front of thousands of people and make those feelings physical. Now the songs are asking something different of him. When he sings My Generation, he is no longer the young man warning that he hoped to die before growing old. He is an 82-year-old survivor, singing words written by people who could not imagine this distance. The irony is obvious. Roger understands it. His audience does too. That is why these final shows may become so emotional. People will not only be listening to the songs, they will be measuring the years between the first time they heard them and the person they have become since. A teenager who bought Behind Blue Eyes may now arrive with hearing aids. A young couple who saw The Who in the 1970s may now move carefully toward their seats. Roger will look out and see his own aging reflected back at him. No dramatic announcement is required. Everyone in the room already knows. The end of The Who as a touring force does not mean the music disappears. The recordings remain. The films remain. Younger listeners will continue discovering the scream in Won't Get Fooled Again without knowing how much effort it eventually took to produce it. But a recording cannot look back at you. A recording cannot hesitate before a difficult note. It cannot smile after reaching one. That is what audiences may be preparing to lose, not the songs. The living uncertainty of whether Roger can still carry them one more night. Perhaps he will finish the 2026 tour and immediately begin thinking about another. That would surprise no one. He has spent his life refusing neat conclusions. Or perhaps the final evening in Massachusetts will end. The band will leave. And Roger will understand something before the audience does. There will be no announcement, no perfect final speech, just a microphone resting in its stand, and a voice that has not yet decided whether it is ready to become a memory.